committees to order. So this is the tri-board meeting on Tuesday, February 27th. Select board is in attendance. We have Aaron, Ellen, and myself.
School committee's here, myself, Sean, Denise, and Shannon are here. And the FinCom committee is here, and we have Jody, Pete, Sarah, Kathy, Jen, Mike, and myself, John Moore, and Pete Ruby may be showing up a few minutes late.
Joyce.
Joyce. She's slipped in with
She's in the wilderness.
with the other people.
If you don't bring your IDs, you don't get recognized.
Sorry about that, Joyce.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for attending. Tonight is, I don't know, it's our 6th or 7th tri-board meeting, I think. We've been doing them for a bit, and they've been very helpful. Maybe more than that. But these have been very helpful. Tonight, we're mostly going to be talking about revenue estimates and the overrides coming up, because those are closely linked items. And those are the areas that need the most discussion. So I think the most important thing, and maybe it's because Carol and I talked about it for a long time last week, is the revenue estimates. That lets us know where we are. So I'm going to start by handing it out, and I'll walk you through it so you can understand it, and because it is a tricky little piece to look at. Gotta hold on to one. Okay. So I'm going to let that get around the table, and then we'll start talking about the revenue estimate.
Craig, do you have 2 extras, or is that?
Well, when they come around, maybe.
Yeah.
Plenty of extras.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, sorry.
Lisa? Oh, we're good.
All right.
Sorry.
I think the most important thing to notice, yeah, all right.
Now we can begin.
Yeah, thank God, we were waiting. All right. I think the most important thing to look at on the revenue estimate,
Get over there.
we got a chair right over there. if you
Snuggle
want.
time. Yeah.
You have to speak into the microphone.
Yeah, I'm supposed to say that to start. Most important thing is when we speak, we have to use the microphone. I have been told that by just about everybody in this building. So let's keep that in mind. All right, the revenue estimate. Most important thing about the revenue estimate, it is an estimate that was made as of 2/27 today at 11:09. So this revenue estimate will change. It will change often about this process, but it gives us a number. So I'm going to start walking through it so you can understand it a little bit. The first is local taxes. That's the first blue line there, and it has, well, it shows 2 prior years, the current year FY25 and 3 future years. The revenue from taxes is $34,308,000. That includes the taxes we'll bring in normally, plus 2.5%, plus a new growth number. No override is included in that at all. That's without an override. And then it has the debt exclusion money, and debt exclusion money can only be used to pay for the school, the library, the police stations. That doesn't go into operating budgets. So that gives us $34,308 of tax levy this year. And you can see last year it was $32,889. So you can see the changes over years. The next line down is state aid. This is the aid the state gives us. It's all right there in the title. But it comes in with Chapter 70, which is school money, goes into the charter school reimbursements and all these other lines. UGGA is basically I don't even know what that is.
Unrestricted general government aid.
Thank you. It was the general government, but I couldn't get the UG. It's unrestricted general government aid. That's more the municipal side of the money. Now, this town, for the last 26, 27 years at least, has never differentiated between Chapter 70 and UGGA. We've always just said state aid is state aid, and we split it evenly. We don't give the school their $5,024,000 and the town their $1,289,000. We say we have a total of $6,729,000, and we just work with that as a total. As we get down next, we get to other available funds. This includes transfers for like the cemetery and cell phone, the cemetery cell phone piece. Ambulance funds. I'll talk about ambulance funds for just a moment because it is highlighted. Ambulance funds are funds that we collect from ambulance runs, and you can see it's gone from 400 to 600 to 800. This is money we're using in the general fund. That still leaves us enough money to buy an ambulance when it's time to replace the ambulance. Now, you can see it steadies, it smooths out after this year. That was because we got a grant for 4 firefighter paramedics, and we have to fund those now. The grant's gone. So this money goes directly to the municipal side. It funds those firefighter paramedics. And we'll see that on another sheet. Get into free cash uses down here in the next level. So any questions on that in general, just the numbers that we're looking at, just the sources. I'll come to the how we made this year's estimates in a moment. Right now, again, the 700,000, 2.5 levy, new growth, the 700,000. That's a number that the assessor's office and Carol have put forward. As we remember, Carol is quite conservative with her numbers. In 2022, she budgeted 866,000 and we brought in $1.4 million. 2023, she budgeted 800,000, we brought in $1,577,000. 24, I pushed it up to 950 and we brought in 1,098,000. Got a little worried there for just a moment. This year I haven't done any pushing on that. I don't think I will. I think at some point this is going to start falling. And if not this year, it will eventually. Okay, any questions on that top section at all, that first page? Hearing none, I'll move into the next section. As we get into local receipts, now this is another area where Carol has been quite conservative. She uses the recap value. The recap value is saying, this is how much I thought we would make last year, so I'm going to increase that by 10% or 5% this year. So if we look at the first line, motor vehicle excise tax, 2023, she budgeted 957,000, 24, 966,000. The 3-year average from FY22 to FY24 was $1.4 million. So there was $500,000 of conservativeness there. Now, I'm not going to criticize that. If you remember, if any of you are here when Charlie Aspinwall was here, he was on the other side of the spectrum. I mean, we had years where we had, Mark remembers, if we had $400,000 in free cash, we were excited. This formula gives you $3 million in free cash. It's a different problem to have, but right now we're looking at budget problems, so we don't want to be overly conservative. So Carol and I talked, and she felt comfortable moving it to $1,157,000. And then moving out the following years, it slides up a little bit, but not much. I think it's a small percentage increase. Pilot is payment in lieu of taxes. Carol hasn't ever budgeted that, but we got $17,000 on average for it. And the reason she hasn't budgeted it is, again, the conservative nature of her way of thinking. In 20 or so years, that goes away. So it's going to be a problem down the road someday. It's not a problem this year, and we could use the money. Meals tax, we average about $134,000. Carol budgeted $30,000 in prior years. This year we agreed 60, and I'm trying to bump it up more in future years to help us more. As we work our way down, there's some that I don't think should be changed. Some of them are small dollar amounts. Details are very variable. Cannabis impact fee and medical marijuana impact fee, those will end in 27, so we shouldn't budget them anyway. And then you get into like miscellaneous department revenues, small numbers, not worth pushing on. Getting down to the next highlighted area, though, liquor license. Unless we stop selling liquor, we bring in $33,000 a year on those licenses. This year, it's sitting at nothing. It's no budget, but I think budgeting half of that is a very safe number. That would mean half of our suppliers went out of business and stopped selling. Recreation fees, and this addresses the problem the FinCom had when Chris had to come before you to ask for more money. Last year we budgeted $100,000. This year we're budgeting $200,000, and we're putting all of that into the recreation budget, so there won't be a shortfall this year. Again, it's earned revenue, no shortfall. Working our way down, building permits, I mean, we've averaged 587,000, but going back to the idea that eventually it's gonna come down, I don't wanna get caught short. 200 is a safe number. Refunds and reimbursements, oh, sorry.
Quickly, if I may, how can you expect permits to go up and new growth to go down?
Good question. I was gonna ask this.
How can I expect permits to go up? I'm not expecting permits to go up.
Stay even,
Stay even,
but new growth is lower.
because 200,000, where is it? What am I looking at for my permit number?
Permits is 210, 220, 231, 243.
Yeah, I think that $200,000 number, that 200 to 250 is a reasonable number. We just changed fees on permits. This is not big construction. This could be your kitchen remodel and all those things. And 200's been our typical number forever. I mean, that we've always, Charlie Aspinwall, prior to Carroll, that's what we would budget. And we've averaged 587,000. I mean, even if I go back to 23, let's go back a few years. I can look back on this and see what that number is.
Dig that much into it.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand it.
And again, there's a point where it's diminishing returns on, you know, if I could knock $20,000 off of it, I don't think it would change the discussion significantly. And also, the other piece is I don't think new growth is going to fall as much as we may have it falling, but that's why we're not counting on a lot this year. And this will change every year. But as we come out, refunds and reimbursements, the next line that I highlighted, and I didn't budget any of these other permits. There's all these ancillary permits that didn't get anything budgeted. So, and those did average $100,000, $70,000. So none of that is budgeted. So I think we have some safety net there. Refunds and reimbursements, this is the COA officer we share with Medway. And the reason it hasn't been budgeted is Medway could back out of the contract. Well, if Medway backs out of the contract, we have to decide whether we're keeping, not COA, animal control. Yeah. I had all the right letters, Joyce, just the wrong order. All right. It's been a very long day. So I think it's safe to assume that as long as we have an animal control officer, Medway will kick in for it, and that's the 43,000. In prior years, we had the IT position in there, so that's gone down. So I think that's safe. Medicare reimbursements average 78,000 a year. We had a few years that were outliers. 30,000 is a safe year, and again, we're looking at half that, or actually 40. I take that back. 50 to 60 is a safe year. We had 1 year that was an outlier, so we're significantly up in out years. I added 30,000 more for out years. Opioid settlement, we got 41,000 this year, and it's gonna be 7,500 each year going forward. So that's how we arrived at the new growth. I'm sorry, at the local receipts. Those are assumptions. Carol agrees with everything for 25. I don't think she disagrees with 26. We've made, the only lines we touched were the ones that are highlighted, and I touched a couple of them after I looked at it for the 17th time and added a 15,000 here and there. So I don't think it's radically high growth. Any questions about the revenue? Because the revenue is the basis for everything else we talk about. And that's basically how the town gets its money. So if you look at the column, the actual average, we average almost $4 million a year over the years, and we've budgeted 1.4, 1.3. So that's why free cash has been so high. Yeah, so
And now you're budgeting half.
we're budgeting a little more than that, yeah.
So-
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of upside there.
Just to summation, so the discussion you had with Carol and kind of a half step for fiscal year 25 is
Talking
what
about
these.
Oh.
So the difference between like a fiscal year 24 versus a fiscal year 25 is the conversation you had with Carol,
Yeah.
making those adjustments.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That is.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was no real pushback. She admitted she was very conservative, and we've been in a position where we could be very conservative. We didn't have to look for extra money in prior years as much. And I would never go out on a limb and say that we should, budget $500,000 of building permits, though I'm fairly confident we'll get them this year. I think we're going to get another big year of building permits. But I think eventually they go away, and I don't want to build that into a base. All right. Any questions on the first one? Because now we get to the next one, which is. Just trying to grab one, but I can't seem to. There we go. All right, what's coming around now is the traditional sheet that we've used since at least 2020, maybe prior to that, that shows our allocation of these funds. I'll wait for everybody to get one. And again, this is current as of 11/08. As you can see, my IT director fixed the printing issue, and I was able to make a PDF by 11 o'clock today. So, all right, so what this does is it shows each of the sources of revenue on the first page. Part 1 is determining revenue, Part 2 is removing shared expenses. So I'm going to start with determining revenue. Everything ties back to that revenue sheet. You can see it's got the A's, the B's, the C's, the D's, so it just adds back up. C is multiple parts, you have to add several things to get C, but it does tie. First column is blue, and that is the prior year, FY23. FY24 is the year that we're in. FY25 is the year we're budgeting. And it's got 3 years out going forward. It gets a little iffier as you go out. There's a lot of variables on this. But looking at this, you can see the revenue, we get down to the 41,654. That's how much revenue we will have for FY25. That's all revenue. That's got our debt exclusion in it. That's got all sources. Then we have to start pulling out all of the things that we share. So for instance, the state gives us money, but they also take back $359,000. So after they give us $6,725,000, they charge us for $359,000. Then we have some other shared expenses that are in there, and I hid these because there are a lot of columns there. But these other shared expenses are the insurance cost. So any employee that works more than 20 hours a week gets insurance, or is eligible for insurance. They can buy into it. We factor that as a 6% growth year over year. Carol's been told it's between 6 and 8. So that's my first variable. If that's 8, the numbers change. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is current as of today at 11/08. Employee benefits, same situation. That's the general insurance, I'm sorry, for the building. The next one is employee benefits. So $7 million in employee benefits. Tri-County, fortunately for us, it has gone down. Enrollment is down. And we've been hit with about a $40,000 cost for the construction. So enrollment fell, the charge went up, but it still saved us a little bit of money. In out years, it's going to be close to $350,000, up to $250 to $350 a year, depending. And there is a further discussion to be had in 26 how that can be paid for, because I think there might be some ways we can do that out of free cash and our other funds. Because remember, we're still conservative on local receipts. All right, so moving on down, debt, overlay, bond premium, all those costs come out. So we have $9.7 million of shared expenses we subtract. That gives us $31,518,000 for budgets. That's how much we can spend on the operating budgets in the town. Any question on that? I think it's important we all have the same basic framework to start with. Yes.
I just have a question for the revenue growth for FY25 for clarification. On line F, you have it at 1.44%. Is that because of the less conservative budgeting we're doing for that fiscal year?
No, that's because, quite honestly, that has free cash of 500 something in it, and stabilization of 400,000 in it.
Okay.
So that is another source of revenue that we had in the prior year in FY24 that we don't have in FY25.
Understood, just a sharp drop from
Yeah,
24 to 25.
it really
So
is.
that explains
Yeah.
it, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And when you get to the next page, it's even more pronounced.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
is the employee benefits, at one of the finance committee meetings, Mr. Kaczynski said the rate increase would be in the neighborhood of 8 to 12%. Is that included in this?
That's the rough number we got.
Right.
We don't have the specific, and we won't have it probably for another 3 weeks.
So is there anything, Mr. Chair, in this to?
There's 6% because Carol mentioned that it was 6 to 8.
Okay.
6 to 8. So we are on the low side of the estimate. I
Okay.
don't think 6 is gonna be right. I think there's gonna be 8, but that was her number. I didn't go through and,
We'll have to tweak it a
Change
little bit,
everything.
Lori, and
Yeah.
hopefully that's close.
yeah, we're in the ballpark, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, that's the best we can hope for at this date. Now, when you get to the next page, now we've got this money and we're allocating it out. So we've used a philosophy of budgets can grow by. You know, that's how much we'll allow budgets to grow. And 4% has been our goal. Last year we had, because of all the growth, 6%. This year we're allowing budgets on this worksheet to grow by 4%. So the first block, the lovely pastel green, is the school. And you can see that a 4% growth takes us from 19,244,000. If you can see that, I made it a little smaller than I should have, to $20 million. So that's 4% growth. Then you have add backs. If you look at FY '24, you can see we added back 538,000 for free cash and 400 for stabilization. That's the money I talked about before. That's not coming back in. So the school budget, even though we're allowing the base budget to grow by 4%, it will actually fall by 1.24%. So there will be a drop in the money that the school's real dollars that the school can spend. That's going to be the meat of our conversation, the override conversation. But I thought we'd show it. It shows it pretty clearly here.
Yeah.
Then you get down to the municipal base. We had 9,897,000. We grow by 4%, that puts us at 10,500,000. We add back the firefighters for 200. We add back the rec fees for 200. The municipal side will actually grow by 7.03%. That's no override. That's the growth that municipal's looking at. So I've heard it said when I watch meetings that we're shortchanging municipal to fund the school. We got a municipal budget growing by 7% with no override and a school budget falling by 1.24% with no override. Nobody's being shortchanged in this budget. But those two changes to the municipal side make sense because those are the changes that we agreed to when we made, 4 or 5 years ago, we brought in the firefighters, when we did all those other things. So that's all part of the plan. So that leaves, and this addresses Kathy's question a little bit, about $276,000 left over at the bottom. I could, increase the spread a little bit, but that's kind of my health insurance contingency. That's the money that I think I have for emergency use. That's where we are now. And if you look back, you can see the changes that were made in FY '23, where we moved the custodial costs. We added all the things back into the budgets. You can see how it all played out pretty nicely. It's a pretty clear sheet, and it gives you a decent history of what's been done over the years. So that's where we are. Any questions about this workbook and the revenue estimates?
Yeah, one question. So the revenue increase for recreation really is, it's like a negative, though. I mean, there's no increase, really, because it's gonna be offset by revenue, by, extra fees and so forth, so.
Right, well, that's increasing we're bringing in the revenue, but we're increasing the departmental expenses by the same amount. So it is a net zero, but
It's a
you
net
have to
zero.
you have to show the revenue and you have to show the expense, otherwise it doesn't show up.
Well, no, I know that, but
Yeah.
it kind of offsets it the wrong way. It really shouldn't offset it like that. It's a net zero increase over last year.
No, we're actually increasing the rec budget.
100,000, I know, but you're also receiving another $100,000 in revenue, so it's a real net zero increase.
And that's 200,000.
It's a $200,000 increase to the revenue because we didn't bring any of that revenue into the municipal side in '24. If you look at municipal '24, the rec line is blank. There's nothing there. We ate all of the rec costs out of general funds last year. Now we're earmarking the rec funds for recreation specifically, as if it were a revolving fund almost.
Right, so you're front-loading it to be paid back at the
Right.
end of the fiscal year. is
Right,
what it
and
is.
since I've
So-
increased, right, and exactly, and since I've increased the, and that would be the $200,000 increase in expense, plus a $200,000 increase in revenue that's being associated with it. And same thing with the firefighters.
Yep.
Firefighter budget's going to go up 200,000, and the revenue's going to go up 200,000.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of a misnomer when you're tacking it on to the 7%, when you're saying there's a 7% increase in municipal budgets. I think it's kind of a misnomer by doing that.
It absolutely is not a misnomer. The municipal budgets are growing by 7%. If you look at where they were last year, they were 10,415,000, and they're growing to 147,000, which is 7%. The fact, we didn't have to choose to put the rec budget in there or the ambulance funds in there. That was a choice. We could have spread those over everybody to try to make the school more whole, but we think this is the right allocation because they are the way they're being used. Yeah.
If I may, I agree with Mr. Crone. Not so much that it's a misnomer, I just think there's a better way to explain it. To say that the fire department is growing, the lines, the details may be growing, but we're not getting additional firefighters. We're losing grant dollars. We're not adding firefighters. So the budget may grow, but when we explain that to voters, we need to be very clear that we're not adding firefighters.
Right. I'm sorry, if that was misunderstood, adding
It's
firefighters.
not, it's not here to
Yeah.
people that do
We,
this on
we
a
are,
weekly
we are
basis.
increasing the cost to the fire department by $200,000. We are
We're also-
adding $200,000 of cost to the fire department.
We're doing budget semantics, but
Yeah.
in real terms, to the average person, the firefighting capacity and the resources is exactly the same as it was last year. We're in
Right,
the
and,
details here.
you're right, it is a little semantics, but we're talking dollars, and we have to turn a budget in. When I present the budget to the town, we're going to have an $11,147,000 municipal budget. I
Again,
can't-
just
yeah,
my,
yeah.
Greg, nobody trusts you more than I
Yeah.
do on these budget
Yeah.
numbers. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
imply anything different. I'm just saying, we need to be careful when we discuss this, that we're very clear in terms of what's on 4 pages of spreadsheets should not get hopefully it doesn't get to that level of detail at town meeting.
Oh, it
We just need to be
won't, yeah.
careful on how we discuss it so that the voters clearly understand. Dollars to dollars, revenue goes up,
Yep.
costs go down, or the other way around, but the firefighting is exactly the same as it was last year.
Okay, I agree with you on that. We haven't changed services any. So the town is getting a level service budget, and the school will be facing 15 full-time equivalent, or 12, or whatever the number is, they'll give you a number, full-time equivalent position cuts, because there is a definite drop there that has to be absorbed. So anyway, having said all that, the real point is to make sure we have a baseline we agree with, because this is the workbook we use and we've used for years. And we have that same 200,000 the prior year. Yeah, that was the same number that was sitting there the year before. And all these other number changes were there all the years before. But the real issue is now we have an override concern. And unless there's any other questions about the mechanics, and I got it in to a half hour, which was the goal. But it is detail. Yeah.
Craig, can you, I might have missed this when you described it. Just explain what is the row E, which is the exclusions. What are those revenue exclusions?
Yeah, let's go up to that. Okay, the revenue exclusions are, well, the first, I think does it show on yours, or I just unhide it on mine?
No, it's not
Okay.
showing.
The first one is $3 million of debt exclusion. That money can't be used for anything else.
Yep.
The next one is $2.5 million of free cash, because Carol includes free cash in that top number, that $46 million number.
Okay.
So that's free cash that was not used in the budget. The 538 that we did use in the budget shows up. There's another $2.5 million of free cash we didn't use in the budgets.
Okay.
Then you've got directly allocated state funds of $384,000. That's where, out of our state aid money, $384,000 has to go to, some goes to the library, some goes to other items. There's a lot of little single, one-off little items.
Yeah.
But those are the two biggest points.
I have a prior iteration of this, but I couldn't
Yeah.
match how
It
it
won't.
was adding up.
The prior iterations, I haven't touched this in a couple years, so I've cleaned it up. And I was hesitant to share an Excel spreadsheet of this level with everybody prior to going over it with everybody. I'll send it to your chair with the most current, and he can email it out as appropriate.
Understood.
If anybody would like it, to look at it.
But I've been
Yeah.
in the weeds with you before, so
I understand, yes. You were on my list. Did I send it to Jody?
I wouldn't have looked at it before today anyway.
Yeah. And then the other part of it is, now, for instance, we've got all these what-ifs. What if new growth is 20% higher, which would only make it $850,000? That's not out of the realm. And all those things really hit the out years a lot, favorably. So there's a lot of what-ifs in this thing. All right, so with that being said, if there's no more questions about this, I'll move to the override.
Could I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry if I'm missing this somehow. So I'm looking at, on page 2, step 3, allocate funds. You've got approximately $31 million in expenses between school budget and municipal.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And then we're showing on the first page, revenue of $31,518,000.
Yep.
So where is the deficit?
The deficit is, to get to this, it's not saying this is what the request was. That's saying how much we can afford to spend. So we're telling the school they can afford to spend $20,095,000. I'm looking at the line L, school budget.
Yep.
Last year, they spent $20,347,000. That's the deficit. That's where the deficit lives.
Basically, the deficit is that 300,000, 250, plus whatever growth we have, which is roughly 900,000.
Yeah.
Which takes us to a deficit of, we'll have a deficit of 1.1 million.
And what was the growth attributed to, the 900,000?
Just the regular, so like our salaries at just going up 4%, our salary increase is $700,000. So if the 900,000, and the reason why on this sheet, it goes down only 300,000 is because that's what the 4% is available, but what we need to replace is this 900,000. If we had that 900,000, our deficit for this year, we'd be looking at roughly 200,000, which
Would be great.
probably not great.
We wouldn't be here.
Right.
Well, we'd be here, but we'd have a different meeting. So again, this isn't what the school requested for a budget. This is what the numbers, just the flat-out finance allows the school to have as a budget. And that's the difference. It just so happens that the municipal side will be very, very close to what is allowable, just because 4% growth is about typical. I mean, we can live with that usually in most departments. Okay? So Mark, you want to give us an update on the school
Yeah, so our
override needs?
Can you
app,
speak in the microphone?
yeah,
Sorry,
I just
know
turned
you.
it this way.
Know you.
So our ask, and we're tweaking the numbers, and we're coming to the finance committee next week, and we'll have more concrete, but, you know, it's pretty concrete. Our ask is 21.2 million. So we would be at a deficit of roughly 1.1 million. And so we have not identified what the reductions would be for that 1.1 million for this year. However, when we were going through this process last year, and we had to assume scenarios of not getting free cash, not getting stabilization, having the whole thing, we had total reductions identified of 1.3 million. So just going off of last year's list, which we had as tier 2 and tier 3, so these are the reductions that had free cash and stabilization not passed. Again, these are last year's items.
These are
And
the
I'm
items
not-
that were funded by
yeah,
free
and-
cash and stabilization.
Right, and I'm not going to go through the exact positions, but it was 7 actual teaching positions, full bodies at risk, and 8 aid positions at risk, in addition to, so that's 15 people, teachers and aides, that were tied to $1.1 million.
Was any administration staff tied to that?
There were, not in those, because those were in the reductions that we actually made in the first 700,000 we made last year.
So
So,
there's-
I'm sorry, you cut 700,000 of staff last year
Yeah.
to get to this point.
Let me make sure I got that now.
I thought it
No,
was 300.
340, sorry,
Yeah,
340. That's right,
I
340.
thought it was 340,000.
Seven- I had the seven in there. Yeah, so there were administrative positions and partial positions in that first round of 340. And again, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be any this year. I'm saying those were what was not reduced last year.
So in that 340, how many were teachers, how many were administrative?
They were mostly fractional positions, and,
So they really weren't gone, they just lost hours.
no, there were some that were gone, and some, even if they're fractional, they were only a fraction, so it was a whole body. So if you had a staff member whose total hours was only 20, it's a 0.5 full-time equivalent, but that whole person lost all of their hours.
Can I ask?
And, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So you're not planning to bring any of those positions back with the
None of the
override that we're
positions
talking
that were
about?
reduced last year are coming back.
Okay.
Can I ask a naive question, perhaps? Why does the solve for a budget shortfall come to cutting staff and not any other cut of any sort? I mean, you don't have any granularity before us right now. I appreciate that's coming.
Because over 85% of our budget,
Oh,
because
it's
over
people?
85% of
Okay.
our budget is staff.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
new,
all
I'm a
it is.
freshman, so
That's all
it
it
could
is.
be naive. I did qualify
That
that.
was a good question.
That's all it is.
Yeah. And I think you'll find that on the municipal side too. Really, majority of running a town is people, positions.
So, just so I can understand this clearly, last year, the town granted the schools 938,000
Yep.
additional dollars.
Yep.
Then with your negotiated salary rates, you have another $700,000 in additional costs that you didn't have in FY '24.
Yep, that's, just the salary.
And you're
portion of
asking
it.
1.1 million. So realistically, you had 938,000 in cost, adding 700,000 in salary increases, and you're only asking 1.1 million? That's right. Is that how I'm reading this correctly?
No, so.
No.
Okay,
We-
please, I just want to make sure I understand.
I think it's the fact that the 4% allows it to grow to 20 million to start with.
Right.
So we're counting on that
I see.
4% coming in.
Yep, that's where I'm
And then that
missing.
1.1 million
Yep.
comes in on top of
Nope,
that.
that's the factor I'm
Yeah.
missing, so thank you, I appreciate that.
It's not like I haven't looked at this for the last week, really, really hard.
I have a question. Mark, why are we talking about last year's? Have you not started on this year's?
Because we haven't identified the exact positions for this year's, because we didn't have the revenue numbers or the.
Okay, so when
or
does that
what-
happen?
Within the next week, so we'll have, when we come to the finance committee meeting next week, we'll have this year's. And the reality is, it's probably gonna be pretty close to last year,
Right.
because that's
Okay.
where we were.
But is it gonna be, is it this year, is it gonna be more than talking about FTEs, which everybody is so FTE'd over? Oh, can we talk about, I don't want name, I don't want rank, I don't want serial number, right? But can we actually talk about what would happen if this override doesn't happen in real
There will come a point,
positions?
there will come a point, probably in April,
Yep,
because what happened last year was, and this is just the timing of, so up until then, we can talk about exactly what I just stated.
okay,
Teaching positions, it'll come by positions. We can designate between full bodies and fractions of staff. But in April, like we did last year, the individuals who were at risk were actually informed. When those people are informed, we will then be able to talk about specifics. But until we have.
but
until-
last year in April, you never talked about the specifics? I was told they were never informed, but maybe I wasn't
No,
informed.
the staff was informed when
Okay.
they were at.
Okay, and then in addition to that, is there a way to tell us, so we can convey, what those positions being cut, what that means to the school? Does it mean programs are cut? Does it mean class sizes double? Can you get
Yeah, Yeah, we can get like impacts
Okay.
of what that,
That
yeah.
would be good.
yeah.
I think that
That's all I can.
if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that if we found, the name of the position, not the person, but a social studies teacher.
So
a-
here's the,
Yeah.
here's the thing about when you,
Or is that
when you
then
identify a
compromising?
position, when you identify a position in the Millis schools, you identify the person. Because
Okay.
there's only one.
You But you just said it a minute ago,
Gotcha.
in April.
Yeah,
they're
in
gonna-
April, because they'll be informed.
in
But up
Okay.
until then, but there's only one of, there's only one.
One of the two of us is gone. Yeah, well, I think, I guess my question was though, but you'll be able to say, prior to April, that we're looking at this many teaching positions, this many aid positions, without going into it's a third grade teacher.
Correct.
Or, yes, so that's, yeah, I think we're there, but.
Things like that.
Well, I think the other thing too would be though, if you can give a range, so you don't have to say it's the first grade teacher, but it's going to be a teaching position with a salary range of 95 to 100. So that we're getting a sense that
60s.
we're not just cutting, like 50 people at $20,000, but it's actually going to hurt a top-notch staff member at $95,000 or $100,000.
But it won't because of contracts. Like, there's a
Right.
whole way that we have to do the reductions based on the contracts.
Right.
So seniority, so people that, we typically have to cut higher number, lower salary based on the contracts, unless there's nobody else that does that role, and they're the only person. So the contract requires us to take a certain approach when we do the
No,
reductions.
I get that, but it's, and the salary range would be important, because, again, not $30,000, but this is a $70,000 person. I know it has to be
Why does it
seniority. and
I don't
Why
think
does
we
it
need
think
to
it's
do that.
important at all?
Well, the reason, I don't want to argue about it, but the reason it matters is it's showing that these are serious cuts to serious people that mean a lot to the school, as opposed to janitorial staff or something else.
So when you say things like that, the implication is that the 20-year veteran teacher, high school English teacher, because their salary is 90,000, they, as a person in their position, is significantly more valuable than the $30,000 paraprofessional who's helping the special needs kid in kindergarten and preschool.
It's not what I'm saying.
That's what comes
That's what
across.
comes out.
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, but that's just how it comes across.
I'm not sure valuable I'm not sure valuable may be as impactful.
Exactly.
Impactful to your system.
I don't think we have to do impact based on the dollars, though.
Yeah.
Impact
I know,
based on
but
the
does it, I mean,
programs.
I don't know, I've been away a long time. Do you know
I
what
don't
I'm
think a
saying, though?
person's salary
right.
necessarily
I agree with
just
that. with
tells
Mark.
you how impactful they are.
I don't know, sometimes I think a salaried person, like a whole department will disappear. I mean, I could be wrong, but listen, perception's everything, right? Perception.
But there's also
And
some
if we
perce-
perceive
some
that,
perceptions
others
that-
perceive that.
But some perceptions that certain roles in the school are significantly less valuable than others, and if we got rid of certain positions, it's okay, because they're not teachers, that perception is just false.
Right, well, listen, perception's everything, and I know I was right.
It is the perception of a lot of people, and that's why I say, to help your
So-
benefit, to
But I-
benefit your point.
But last
But
year was
I
never-
do think, I do think that if we make our case and explain that based on who is impacted, what that impacts from the programs, we could have a $60,000 employee that is an entire program. So it's what the impact to the programming is based on the individuals that are impacted, and it won't have a direct, in some cases, tie to a high dollar value for that person.
And I'd argue that your $40,000 aide in the classroom who's doing sped kids, working with sped kids, is far more impactful to our problem than a $95,000 high school teacher. Because if we cut that special ed aid, we've now dug our hole just a little bit deeper. We haven't saved any money. We've compounded the problem.
Right.
So I think that you averaged 63,000 on your last one, 953,000 divided by 15 people, so there you go. They're not highly compensated individuals for the most part.
But not for nothing, what you brought up, Denise, I didn't know up until a minute ago, that just by the union, what you have, you have to start. I did not know that. So, not for nothing, I don't know everything, but if I don't know that,
And the
Sure,
exact
sure.
people can
That should
change.
be
because what can-
explained.
Because what can happen, so one of the pieces that plays into it is, we can remove a position, and that could be a certain person.
I didn't know that till now.
They then have bumping
Private
rights.
sector.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that's
if
not this
they,
part. That's not
so
this
they have
part.
bumping rights. So what that allows them to do is
that's
if
too
they,
much information.
if they have, no, if they have the same certifications to fit a position that was not reduced, they can, and they have seniority, they can take that out. So that whole cycle, we won't know even who goes, until that goes.
And
A
Mark did
third grade
explain that
teacher
last
could
year.
bump
Yeah,
a
he
fourth
did.
grade teacher.
That's
So
right.
that person stays, but you
Right.
lose the classroom teacher.
Right.
And I think what we did last year is we did building, right? So we
Yeah.
did it by building because we thought that we had a little bit more,
Yeah.
it was a little bit more concrete building-wise, but I know we had some bumps from middle to
Right.
elementary, so.
Unions work the same on the municipal side.
Mr. Schultz?
So get ready. Yeah.
What?
Unions
I
are
said
the same on the
Unions work the
municipal.
same on the
Right.
municipal side, so like the SEIU union, it's the same thing could happen if somebody was let go, they could then bump somebody else in a position.
For layoff.
For layoff, it's just a different animal than, like you said, private sector.
Yeah.
Is the select board considering across-the-board cuts to the municipal budget as well as the schools, or is this just a school problem? Are there not savings that could be had across the town?
We don't believe there's significant savings because, again, it's majority staff. And as with our homes, you know.
I'm implying staff in my question.
Oh, I don't think we are in a position to be talking about reducing too many staff. I mean, Council on Aging, library, I mean, yeah, we got HCA funding. When that goes away, maybe we talk about some hours at the library. Police, fire, DPW, I can't think of a position to cut there. I'm having a tough time coming up with municipal cuts that I'd make other than in the staff area. And, you know, as we've all seen with our home bills, it's just getting cheaper and cheaper to buy gasoline and other supplies. So there's no cuts there. I mean, I'm worried about those numbers, you know, that are gonna be an issue. So we don't see it on the municipal side. We've looked at the budgets. We think we can live within the 4% growth. We think that's a number that can be achieved, or at least very close to it. I mean, we would talk, you know, minimal change. We haven't finished the budget yet, but we don't think there's a lot of savings.
Have you or will you consider zero growth and applying all of the additional revenue to the problem?
If we do a 0% growth in town, we're
With the
going to have
exception
to.
of the firefighter grant?
Well, no, but we have union contracts. I mean, we would have to reduce staff to do a 0% growth. We would have to pick, let's see, the municipal side is growing by, call it $500,000. That, the allowable growth is $500,000. We would have to find $500,000 worth of contractual raises, people getting $500,000 worth of salary to cut. So that's a police officer, approximately with everything in, is about 100,000, fires in that number. So it'd be 5-ish positions on the municipal side if we said we're not growing anything here. So that's what I see with that.
And then
Yeah.
one more question, if I may. We hear a lot on the union negotiations for the school, and probably the other union negotiations and the other unions, but the 4% number, it's the starting position. But that's not a limit, per se. I mean, what are the chances that, I know you can't divulge, negotiations, so I'm not asking that, but, is there a hard line number or any chance at all that growth, salary growth will be less than 4%? I mean, is that a goal of the school committee? Is it a reasonable goal?
It is not, in my opinion, to negotiate a contract for less than total cost of 4% is not a reasonable goal.
And let me, may I just for a
Yeah.
second? Because the municipal's easier to understand. Once I explain municipal, you can add the school twist. The municipal contracts, all of our contracts in the town are growing by 2% cost of living. 2% increase cost of living. That's what every union's agreed to. Then they've agreed to steps, and those steps stop after a certain number of years. That's another 2%. So we have some of our most highly skilled workers in departments who are growing by 2%. Our newest employees are growing by 4%. You can get a certification to drive a truck that gives you a couple $100 more. You can get all these other little add-ons, but really 4% is what our youngest, least experienced staff, or cheapest staff are growing by. Our most experienced, most senior staff are growing by just the 2% cost of living. So this 4% number, they're not getting a 4% raise. They're, for the most part. Our entry-level staff, which start at a lower level, will. But at some point, and I can't remember, Mike, the steps are like 10, 12 steps in some cases.
Usually 10.
So after 10 years, they stop unless we have the magic super step, which kicks in at some point down the road. But that's, you know, after 15 years, you get another raise. Yes. There's a little longevity to it, but it does work out to about 4% for our average staff, you know? So, and on the school side, you've got those same two pieces, but you've got something else.
Yeah, you have lanes, which is, as they move through education, as they move from bachelor's to master's to doctorate, you get those ranges. And we have targeted our contracts, and again, a lot of credit goes to the local unions here in Millis for agreeing to contracts that fall within the 4% growth rate that we have targeted revenue. Last week, Newton sat in school all week. I will tell you, without a doubt, we have not signed a contract that anywhere near what Newton went on strike for last year. We're not even close. And that's the commitment that, and the recognition that from our unions and that we've worked with for 15 years now on getting contracts that are sustainable in Millis. And so to try and get less than 4% really isn't going to be attainable. Generally, like a third of our teaching staff is on that top step, so they're not getting steps, and 2/3 are moving through. So generally, our cost of living is the same, 2 to 2.5%, and then a bunch of staff is getting, you know, another 2% in steps coming through. And then, you know, retirements help out every now and then.
And some of the difference with a teacher's position and a DPW position, you don't go from a laborer to a supervisor to a, foreman. And as you do in the DPW, where you have different jobs, if you're a third grade teacher with 10 years experience, you're still a third grade teacher. So you don't get promoted because you're a fourth grade teacher. You don't get more money the higher you go up the scale. So that's why the seniority and the steps, the lanes, all that stuff is important, because as you get those master's degrees and advanced training, that gives you more money. That's how you advance in the teaching world.
Well, I appreciate both the answers. There's state DESI data out there that, it's raw data, and it tells you what each district is averaging for their personnel increases year to year. 4% is certainly attainable and typical of, I would say, what other districts are getting. It's not to say that it's the best, but there's others that are negotiating much higher contract increases. And I think that thus it's important to have the conversation to put in perspective what we are getting. To the outside looking in, if you go into a negotiation and the number that we've heard year after year after year is 4%, how much of a negotiation is it? We've also heard the question raised in finance committee meetings and other discussions as to, would the union consider less in order to save some positions, to not have layoffs? Obviously, out of contract, out of cycle, highly, extremely doubtful that we would reopen negotiations. That's been the school committee's answer all along. I don't even know if this is a bargaining, unit year right now anyway, so it's the same answer.
Right.
So there's not much, there's nothing that's gonna happen to that 4% this year.
No, and I think, we talk about 4% a lot, and we've landed at roughly 4% a lot. That is not because we walk into the table with the unions and we both sit there for 20 minutes and say, okay, it's 4%, and we walk out the door. The ask is generally, you know, it's come down in years, but they don't walk in and say, okay, let's sign our 4% agreement. The negotiation gets to 4%.
And I think the other thing that I learned when I moved over to Select Board from Finance Committee, we can't just reopen negotiations. They have to agree to it. And if they're going to agree to it, they're going to want something just to sit at the table. You know, so, I mean, just to even say, let's renegotiate, fantastic. We now get this, just to even talk to you. And then we can try to renegotiate it. So it's a very tough move to reopen. All right, so anything else on the school override questions? We can talk about all of them. I do want to let Aaron talk briefly about the municipal side too, because we've looked at budgets a little bit.
Okay, so for the town, we do have some override needs to discuss. We have, and I'm not sure how much the finance committee's gotten through the presentations yet, but we have around 3 police officers being requested, a fire captain, and a DPW laborer. The DPW, I mean, the fire captain is something, have you guys seen them yet? You did?
We've had
Okay.
police, fire, we have not had DPW yet.
Okay, so you already heard the police and fire, I don't need to regurgitate that, but for the DPW laborer, they haven't grown
Correct.
in years and really need another body. So so with this whole conversation, it's not to say that there is no town needs, because, you know, there are some. So in terms of combining that into an override, I'd say we would all need to group that together.
Yeah, we're in two different positions. The school needs money to avoid devastating cuts. We've got huge growth needs on the municipal side. And overrides are typically done by a town about every 5 years. This town's gone 18 years without an override. We've been really successful override. We've been really lucky because every time it looks like we're going to need one, we get marijuana money. Thank you. We get Glen Ellen. Thank you. You know, we get all of these.
We get COVID.
Yes, so every time we're right on that cliff, looking over with our toes dangling off, something happens, and it gives us 2-3 years, then 2-3 years more. And the municipal aid certainly isn't there, and the school wouldn't be at the cliff right now, and the school wouldn't be at the cliff now if not for the special ed astronomical increase. So that's really what we're looking at. But the town is seeing needs. The police gave us a closed door, watch the videotape stuff, which dog hearing's originally my least favorite thing. This is now my least favorite thing. Okay, so these are the things that we see. We're not a dangerous town. But more police officers doesn't make it necessarily safer for the officer. It makes it far safer for the citizens who could be facing mental health crisis and having police arrive who can deliver non-lethal force instead of lethal force, because if you're the only police officer that shows up to a domestic disturbance where somebody has a knife, you have your gun. If there's 2 of you or 3 of you, you have taser, bolo wrap, and somebody has a gun. So it protects the citizens. I don't think the police are at risk, they are armed. I think it's really the citizens that can benefit from this. So that's why we're looking at a police override. As Aaron said, the DPW, it hasn't grown in years, and it desperately needs at least one more laborer, at least. But and then fire, same thing. The chief's presented to you, so you get that need. And really, it's been the aging population has driven up our needs. I mean, there's been more calls. So we see this as a proactive way to fund the needs of the town going forward, and a way to fund the existing issues that are facing the school to avoid the cuts. I can't give you a number on ours yet, but I mean, I'll give you a range. It's probably 350 to 450 would be the range it would be in. I'm just
Actually,
adding
yeah,
up.
Mr. Chair, I
Yeah.
can tell you the full request of 3
Oh.
police officers, a fire captain and the DPW laborer would be 427,000,
Okay.
if all of that was encapsulated.
So the highest it would be on the municipal side is 427. And we're evaluating. We're in much the same position the school is looking at, waiting for the numbers, looking at the revenue growth. So we'll have a number with exactly what we're talking about within weeks. I don't think it's gonna be a long period of time on that. We'll discuss it at one of our next meetings. He just got these today, and he says about $1.1 million. Yeah. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I think one of the things we found out when we were looking at the budgets for the police and fire is among the growth within our own community is mutual aid. And mutual aid, at least on the fire department, is 75%, other towns, 25% them coming to us. Police also have mutual aid responsibilities, and I think we've got to watch out in the future. We can collect money on the fire side because they're mostly ambulance calls, not as many fire calls. But a police officer goes out, a pumper truck goes out, the ambulance goes out, that puts stress on the pumper truck, puts stress on everybody else. As towns like Medway and Medfield and others around us begin to start cutting or aren't funding their police departments and fire departments like we're funding ours, it may produce an impact on ours. So it's something that we may want to start looking at in terms of what does mutual aid really mean and what are the responsibilities of towns that are associated with mutual aid to fund their own departments.
yeah, I've looked at that, and I've talked to the fire chief especially, because that's where the biggest disproportionate number is. And almost every mutual aid call to Millis, I think he said there were 36. I don't have those notes with me, but I was when I was looking at the meeting notes, about 36 mutual aid calls to Millis. Almost 100% of those are fire. It's when something, big building catches on fire, we need to get more trucks in. All but 35 or 36 of our calls were ambulance related. And we make money? No, we make money on the ambulance
Well, there were more
calls.
than 36 calls that we've sent out to Medway and other towns.
Right, but almost all of those are ambulance related. The ones that we've sent out that aren't ambulance related, where there is a fire and we roll a truck, are about 35, 36 calls. That was on one of his slides. I remember looking at that because I was looking at the number. So I think we're getting a fair deal on mutual aid for fire. It's and the ambulance side, it's helping fund our new ambulance and our paramedics. So that's a good thing, except for if we're short on staff. That's when it becomes an issue.
Exactly.
Well, if I recall, the police chief mentioned about starting to charge for details, so that will be a revenue.
We charge for details.
The vehicle, if they bring a
No.
vehicle, it's more.
Exactly,
Okay.
if they bring a vehicle.
So those are things that are going to eventually
you.
start running into that the local revenue sources. It's not gonna run into it enough to change $1 million, but it's gonna run into it.
But it will run
And
into
as you
it.
said, yes, we'll make money on the ambulance calls, but they're already experiencing now that our ambulance isn't here when we need it. So that's going to grow. As our older population grows, as we get more of the over 55 housing, and as the chief said, a lot of these calls are to these medical centers,
Right.
doctors' offices, and so forth. So the real concern would be not so much making money on it, but having it available for our own citizenry. So I'm not saying it's
Right.
something we need to do this year, but it's certainly something we need to start looking at.
Right, and I agree with you, but right now, it's not been an issue for the most part that we haven't had an ambulance when we need it. Not most times, honestly. I've had conversations. We are mostly covering our own calls. There were a few that we didn't, but most of them are our calls. And he's rolling different ways now to try to get ambulances back in town when they do the drop. So he's doing a lot of different things. But you're right, other towns have to fund theirs, and we were in the same boat when we weren't funding ours adequately. Other towns were talking about Millis the same way you're talking about the other towns. So we're in a position right now that it is a demand and a need that we have, and we're able to meet it. But mutual aid, I think that we're coming out on the plus side on our mutual aid. I know we're coming out on the plus side on our mutual aid calls.
Do we
Right.
have neighboring towns, I mean, do people opt out of that?
No, they don't.
Oh,
Because you need it when you need it.
okay, so why are we talking about this?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
I have to be responsible.
Mr. Chairman, there's no real towns that opt out of it, but have been situations where towns have been warned
Yeah.
if it's an over-reliance, and this is from former town I worked in. If there's an over-reliance, they kind of give notice to the other town that they'll only come in for true emergencies if it starts to be an over-reliance. So they won't come in for looking for a dog or helping some minor issue. Obviously, if there's a shooting or something, they always respond to that. But usually, if they feel it's an abuse or if one town is relying too much on another, they will start to notify that town that there's an issue and they're gonna have to address it.
And I think that's one of the reasons we went with more ambulance staff and a lot of things years ago, because we were the town that was being notified.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, as we look ahead to some high-level retirements that are coming in future years, do we anticipate that hitting the municipal side budget kind of doubly on the paying out for retirees plus adding another replacement staff member? Is that going to grow the municipal side even faster?
The retirement benefits, I'll defer to the town administrator. I think we'll possibly save a little bit on some of the positions, but.
On the retirement side, it's not a huge impact, there's
Yeah.
certainly some impact.
Yeah.
But the impact is much smaller than the savings you get from bringing on a new, younger employee at a lower rate. But it's something that we're looking at when working with Norfolk County. I think I'm not sure about this, but I thought their payout year was 2038, 36 or 38, where they're gonna meet their fully funded
Okay.
ratio, but I think it is something there, but it's very hard to come up with a number on that. We've tried, and Norfolk County doesn't give us really specific numbers on
It's not
that.
gonna be a game-changing number.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, it's a question of magnitude
Yeah.
more than anything.
Yeah. It's a great theoretical. So I guess really what it comes down to for the override positions, we've got a needed, make sure that things happen, make sure we don't have to make cuts override, and we've got a set us up for the future override. And this will be the one we ask for if we decide to go that way. We haven't voted on it, but that's the discussion we're having around these positions that are being asked for. Because we don't see a way to add any of them without an override.
So approximately 1.5.
Yeah, the goal would be to be below 1.5.
So is it your intention to combine these overrides into one, or have them separate? Or you're still discussing that?
We have, as a town, historically overseen it as a town issue, not a municipal or a school issue. So the goal that
It's a
we're talking
budget
about
issue.
is a single override. I mean, that's what we've done them historically. I can't say what other people would think about that on the board, but that's our historic position, and that's where we'll start discussing it. We could discuss it tonight. We have a quorum, we have
Mr.
a
Chair.
meeting.
Okay, yeah. Speaking of, I just wonder, and it just, between the couple talking, the school's issue without an override is letting go of staff. It appears the town's issue without an override is not hiring. Could you correct me if I'm wrong?
That is correct, but we,
Okay.
actually, no, I'm gonna correct that slightly. It's not hiring, it's not having enough staff to provide the adequate services. We're looking at it as a way that we need to meet the police requirement of safe responses for people undergoing mental health issues, the fire responses of the increased calls that we've had for falls and injuries and items.
And replacing someone who retired and did it for much less as
Right.
well. So it is a position that we lose.
Exactly. And the DPW is the historic neglect that department's faced. And that will, so,
And the historic neglect of the town.
yeah. So we think there's benefits to the town from all of these.
But don't you
Yeah.
think the indirect costs are gonna drop because you're gonna be hiring a DPW worker solely for the general instead of having to take indirect costs for?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And also, that's the other piece to it, of course, thank you.
That hasn't been discussed with
The
finance
enterprise
yet, the
fund,
enterprises.
the enterprise fund allocation will improve because there'll be a staff
Right.
devoted to just the municipal side.
Right,
I knew that was a point I wanted to make, Kathy. Thank you.
Well, I noticed
Yeah.
on one of your FY '24 goals of the select board was to cut indirect costs altogether,
Yeah.
so.
Well, this puts us very, very close to it. And if there's another little bit that has to happen to finish the project, then
You'll do it?
maybe
Maybe.
maybe we can do it. Let's see where the numbers come in, but it's all driven by number.
And then also, of the 3 police officers, I was confused. Is one of those for the resource officer?
No, that's
No.
another
No.
one. That's a whole other one.
He's funded through HCA funds, and HCA funds run through they end in 27.
Okay.
And there are a lot of things we're looking at. Once we start getting a handle on the real growth rates, we can decide
Good.
what
So I
we
was
can
gonna
absorb.
ask you about
Yeah.
that, you
Yeah.
factoring in that into the override as well, because I knew that was a whole nother position, the
Our-
resource officer.
Yeah, our view is, at least our talking points that we've had is, that's 2 years out, and we have a lot of revenue to look at, a lot of opportunities. Like I said, if it comes in at 850 of new growth instead of 700,000 of new growth, and we're not counting on 850, but if we're wrong and we're low, we're not gonna be wrong because 700 is too high, I think 700 might be too low. That funds the resource officer. So there's ways that this thing percolates out over the next couple of years that could make some big differences.
So if in fact we do go for an override and it's a collective for municipal as well as school, what is the approximate range that you're now, it's the 1.1 for schools and how much for?
Let's call it 1.5. I don't think it would exceed 1.5.
Okay. And have you done, have you figured out what it's going to cost the taxpayers per household? I'm actually a plant. I'm a plant. He actually prompted me.
It works out to, there's a lot of numbers that go into it, but we do have those numbers. I don't have the current value of a house. 500, I'm using last year's numbers, $507,000, a town valuation of $1,743,000,000. Right now, the override would cost 86 cents per thousand evaluation. A typical home would be 435,000.
That's a 500,000.
507,000, which was the average value when this formula was written. We can update it for this year because we got new numbers.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be in the same
That's a
basic.
2023
You gotta
formula?
start at 6 or 7.
No, it's gonna be about 430 because the valuation of the town's gonna go up.
Yeah.
The valuation of the home's gonna go
Yeah.
up. It's still gonna be about
Yeah, yeah.
400, call it 425 to 450 for a discussion range tonight.
Per year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the discussion point for tonight, right now.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
I think you alluded, and we've discussed before, that the Tri-County issue is going to funding for the actual construction in earnest is going to hit us in FY '26. Is that correct?
Some amount in 26.
Has there
yeah.
been any discussion, is there any merit in adding that into the override to create a Tri-County stabilization fund for a year so that you don't ask for a second override in 2 years, whereas you said we should be having one every 5 years, not every 2 years?
Yeah. I guess the question is, we have to look at that, that's a good point, because it would cost, the Tri-County varies every year. We can only charge what we're being charged on interest, or on interest and principal, we have to pay, the way it'd be written. And it would probably have to be a second override, because it's written quite differently than the other one, because it's gotta be all the verbiage about, it varies each year based on actual cost. But that would hit us depending on enrollment. Like right now, we have 25 kids going about approximately. That would be an $80 override. If we have 50 kids, it's $160, so it changed per household, per year. It changes each year as we get the numbers. But I think that's something we need to take into advisement and look at hard, whether we roll it into one or not, or put it all at the same time. I believe we probably can make it out to FY '28, because I've been looking at the free cash numbers, all these other numbers, because that'd be free cash. I think there's a way to make it out to 28, and a lot can happen between FY '25 and FY '28.
But given that,
Yeah.
but given that free cash is typically how we fund capital improvements, you're then likely to sacrifice capital improvements, which are also going to be needed in those coming years.
Well, we funded $320,000 of sped stabilization last year, which we won't need to fund again, because we can only fund it after it goes down. It can only go down for emergency situations, and we're looking at a crisis, but it's not an emergency. We know that it's there. This isn't a surprise, you know? We funded the 111F, we funded stabilization for 300,000 extra. We put a lot of money this year from free cash into one-time uses. So we can decide, it's something to look at, but I think there's enough that we've got a lot of money sitting there that we can figure out how to play around with.
I made my point. I'm glad that you said that you consider it, and I'll just close by saying that you've also said that you anticipate, and I think you're right, that new growth is gonna go down over coming years. The budget is getting more accurate based on what we're including for revenue, budgeting actual revenue numbers for most things. So your free cash number is also gonna go down in the coming years, likely. My crystal ball doesn't work at all.
Yeah, we know that we've got about $300,000 of free cash every year from marijuana money. Not HCA, but the other money. So that's kind of a given. So, and then and under the old regime, we'd have 400,000 more than that, even just because of budget fluctuations. So I anticipate free cash will be in the 700,000 minimum range, maybe $1 million for the next several years, just because of the marijuana 3%, not the HCA, but the others. Yeah.
If I might just make a suggestion as far as the overrides, if you're considering the override now and then considering an override for Tri-County, I think that the public would probably respond more favorably with one override than if we do one now and then one in 2 years. I think that there might be quite a bit of resistance. I could be wrong.
If I can, Mr. Chair, I mean, there's two concerns about that approach. I would say the first, Chair already addressed that with the fact that this is a very unusual debt in that it's going to change radically each year depending upon the enrollment of Miller students at the school. The second issue is that the issue at Tri-County is a debt exclusion.
Right, that's it.
Versus an override, and a debt exclusion is temporary.
Yeah.
If we do it through an override, that's permanent.
Okay.
And it's not to say you have to.
I knew there was a good reason.
It's not to say you have to appropriate the full amount every year, but the public may feel a little queasy about putting that extra money in there that's permanent.
And the third point that I thought, if we really don't need it till FY '28, because we can make it work with the free cash and other stuff, I would hate to start taxing people 3 years early, you know?
And Mr. Chair, just to add on to all the fun, so we also have a school building project ahead of us. And I don't think these impact the budget per se, but worth bringing up. We also have a PFAS well for well 3 treatment plan, as well as MBTA, which shouldn't have a budget impact, but an event to consider nonetheless. So these are, could you speak primarily, or either one of you, on the school project? I know there's a Zoom tomorrow, but.
Right, I think we can talk about the timing. I don't think we have a clue on the amount.
I'm happy to talk about that. Sure.
That's a debt.
Just a little preview for tomorrow night. So we are in the very, very preliminary phase of the school project. So we don't have numbers. We're in design. The goal is renovation. That's the goal. The state makes us look at new build and multiple scenarios for renovation and a code upgrade. So there's different varying solutions that they force us to take a look at. So we're entirely too early, but what we do know is May of 2025 is when we'd be coming to the town meeting for a vote for a project. So a decided solution with budget and reimbursement numbers and all of that. So I hear from May.
I've heard May or November of 2025, only, but that.
It's May.
Okay, it's May for sure. Tell Diane Germain, because she was saying November.
No, it's May.
Okay, okay.
That's what tomorrow night, like the schedule that we have right now, it has contingency in it if we need to go to November.
Okay.
But the target is for May.
Yeah, and the other piece that came up was the MBTA zoning, and Jody's the expert on that, but that's going to hit in May. We're going to have an override, not an override, we're going to have a vote for that on May. And that is different than a cost. That is actually an opportunity. I mean, it was described by somebody that I knew as a juicy carrot wrapped in a bundle of sticks. Yeah, because there is revenue coming in as you do it,
Yeah.
and if you don't do it, you're Milton.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So
exactly.
you've got
Lose money.
You've got, and that could be,
Yeah.
not immediately, but over the long term, a new growth line.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the carrot and then the sticks. So there's a lot to that. It will be voted at this town meeting with a backup in November, so we don't become Milton.
Is tomorrow night's meeting just Zoom, or is it, it's
Just-
just Zoom?
Just Zoom, and then there'll be many, many more. Tomorrow's just the first of many, and so first one is Zoom, second one will be in April. That will be combination, Zoom and in-person. And then there's probably about, at a minimum, community forums, 6 other ones between now and May, and that doesn't include board presentations and whatnot.
And the
So
website has a ton of information.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions for tonight's meeting?
Hi, Mr. Chair, I just
Yes.
want to, who makes the ultimate decision regarding municipal and school override versus separate overrides?
That's a select board decision.
Okay.
Select board puts the override on the ballot.
Is there any way, Mr. Chair, does the school committee support it, or have you
Vote to
discussed it
decide.
yet?
They're here, I mean, I don't know if they have any thoughts on it.
We haven't discussed it as a.
Yeah, we haven't
as a
talked about
committee.
it.
I mean, I know historically, it's gone, put them all together. But
Yeah, and that's my statement. We
That's-
haven't discussed it either, but historically, it's been put them all together. So why don't we each talk about that at our next committee meetings?
And again, Mr. Chair, the town administrator mentioned at the last Finance Committee meeting that, to ask tonight about when you're going to be voting on the budget, because I always understood through Mr. McCaffrey that you present the budget and the FinCom reviews your budget.
We will get that done as quickly as possible. I know that's not a date, but my goal is, I have felt that it's come late in prior years to the Finance Committee. We got revenue numbers Monday through Thursday last week, I got revenue numbers. So we're talking about them tonight, and that gives us the first piece we have. Now, Mike sees what a 4% growth is. He can see where he stands with that 4% growth. We'll have our municipal side numbers done as quickly as we can after that, subject to change if the state cuts our money or if new growth is higher.
Which is
or
talk
something.
of.
As I said, it's got a date and a time on it, so.
Right.
So that is the date and the time this is accurate in too. But I do have about a $200,000, $250,000 cushion in there. But if a lot of these things hit wrong, we've got an issue where we have to look a little further at it.
And then also, throughout some of the Finance Committee meetings, there was discussion of increasing revenue within the departments. And I'm wondering what kind of proactive attempt the Select Board is making at increasing fees or more income generating rather than the costs of.
We just, 2 weeks ago,
Building department
2 to 4 weeks ago, we voted building department permit fees to increase significantly.
Okay, that's good.
We're listening to the fire chief about ambulance fees, but those are based on competitive recommendations. So if he says move up, we certainly will. I think what other revenue sources we have that we're looking at.
We're talking in the cemetery about raising fees.
Excellent.
Another $200 into the budget.
I'm just, Mr. Chair, I'm just concerned about when there's new developments in town, is there any sort of linkage that, okay, you're doing business in Millis, we have the purest water in the Commonwealth, we have infrastructure, we have excellent school system that we're investing in. What you can charge a developer to develop in Millis, and I wish someone would look at that, into that. Thank you.
We'll take that under advisement.
You can charge a developer, other than fees, in what way?
I'll send you some things.
Okay.
Ellen.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to look at
That'd
that.
be
That would be good. Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
I have a quick comment.
Please.
So as we look at the potential of an override, I think the communication of that, as we've talked about, is going to be key, keeping it simple to communicate, simple for everyone to understand. Craig, you and I can go over spreadsheets all day long, and we're
It will
great,
be none of
but
these. You want to
But-
see what I give my board at work? I've got a one-pager. that explains
And that's
it. Yeah.
basically what
Yeah.
we need, like, that argument as to why this is important and why this is the way to go
Yeah.
is gonna be essential, because obviously, none of us wants to pay more in taxes.
Right.
I mean, everything's a lot more expensive these days, salaries aren't keeping up, pensions aren't keeping up. So it's that communication piece that's gonna be key. So,
Retirement isn't.
And this
Well, that's a-
presentation
that's
for tonight, I hope to never have to do again to anybody, but, except till next year. But this is the presentation that the finance committee, the school committee, and the select board have to see so that we're on the same page. Now, we all know where the numbers come from, we can discuss them, but we can't say there's anything that's not 100% transparent on these 4 pages. I mean, you can get down to the smallest number. So hopefully that helps us. We can quibble about whether it should be whether I should count $12,000 a pilot or not. It doesn't matter. It's not going to matter in the big picture. But when we start getting into the override, it's going to be the school positions that are laid out, that are described. It's going to be the police and fire and DPW needs that are described, and that's what's going to carry an override or not.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. All right.
Oh,
Motion
no, just to, the report that the state sent out, that Department of Revenue or something, encouraged these type of tri-board meetings. So
Yeah.
I would like to see it personally more than twice a year that we have been having them.
I could go, I certainly,
You know,
I mean, we
visit
we
the
have
school
other issues.
committee one
Yeah.
time, and then the
Yeah.
FinCom, and then you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's good for the voters and residents.
Yeah, there are topics that we can talk about, like we didn't touch on the pros and cons of MBTA zoning at this meeting. And we should, because that's something that's important to talk about for all of us. I mean, the school's gonna be impacted by it, and the town will be as well. So there's a lot of conversations we could be having. But this one was my personal favorite, but nobody else's, maybe Jody's. But this was this is the numbers, this is the budget for the year, and that's probably the most important thing we're doing as a group, is coming up with a budget for the town that works. And Carol has been wonderful, she is retiring. I am on the selection committee, so.
conservatism is going to be missed.
I don't,
Her spreadsheets are gonna be missed.
I used to be the most conservative person you
Stop
met.
the brag.
She does a beautiful
Let's adjourn
spreadsheet.
and then we can-
This is mine.
Yeah, but she
Yeah.
does.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second?
Okay, it's
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
been moved and seconded, all in favor? Aye.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Have a great night, all.
Thank you, Craig. See ya.
Sure, I didn't realize that.
No.